Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't born into power. He wasn't even born into a nation that still existed. He came from a small island that had just been conquered. He was an outsider, mocked for his accent, looked down on by elites, ignored by the world around him. But history is not written by those who are accepted. It is written by those who refuse to be. And Napoleon refused. In less than 30 years, he would rise from a nobody to the most feared man in Europe. He would defeat empires, redraw the map of a continent, and crown himself emperor. But power like that never comes without consequences, because the same man who can conquer the world can also lose everything. This is not just a story of victory. This is a story of ambition, of power, and of one question that has haunted history for centuries. Can one man truly control the world? Or will the world eventually break him? Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, a small town on the island of Corsica, a territory that had just lost its independence. A few months before his birth, a major event had changed the fate of the island forever: the defeat of the Corsican nationalist forces in the Battle of Ponte Novo. This defeat was not merely a military loss, it marked the fall of the last resistance against the new power that would rule the island, France. Before that, Corsica was under the control of the Republic of Genoa. However, in 1768, Genoa ceded the island to France, triggering an armed conflict with the nationalists led by Pasquale Paoli. Thus, Napoleon was not born into a peaceful world. He was born amidst the ruins of a defeated nation on a land that had lost its sovereignty. The world he knew from the beginning was a conquered world. Napoleon was the second of 8 children in the Bonaparte family. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, a lawyer, was initially a supporter of Corsican independence under Paoli. Meanwhile, his mother, Letizia Romolino, was known as a strict, disciplined, and resilient figure, a character that would later shape Napoleon's personality. However, history does not always offer easy choices. After the defeat of Corsica, Carlo was faced with a bitter reality: France could not be defeated. Instead of continuing the resistance, he chose a pragmatic path. He shifted his support to the French government, entered the new system, and even built connections with the French ruling elite. In the perspective of modern historiography, this decision was not merely betrayal, but rather a survival strategy of a local nobleman who wanted to secure his family's future. And from that decision, Napoleon's fate began to change. In 1778, at the age of 9, Napoleon was sent to France to pursue his education, an opportunity made possible by his father's position in the new system. He began an Autun to study the French language, as he had previously been more fluent in the Italian Corsican dialect. Within months, he managed to master the language. However, his accent remained strong, and that accent would become a source of mockery. Not long after, he continued his education at the military academy in Brienne. It was here that his world truly changed. In Brienne, Napoleon was nobody. He was an outsider, a child from an island that had just been conquered. His accent was different, his culture was foreign, his social status was lower than many other students who came from French noble families. He was mocked, isolated, underestimated. However, instead of being broken, Napoleon chose a different path. He built his own world. He withdrew and read. Books became his escape, as well as his weapon. He immersed himself in works of history, philosophy, and the stories of great conquerors such as Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. At the same time, he demonstrated an extraordinary talent in mathematics, particularly in calculations related to artillery. This ability was not merely an academic advantage. In the military world of the 18th century, mathematics was the key to controlling the destructive power of cannons. and it was there that Napoleon found his advantage. After completing his education in Brienne, Napoleon continued to the elite military academy in Paris. He completed his training in just 1 year faster than most other students. In 1785, at the age of 16, Napoleon officially became an artillery officer in the French army with the rank of second lieutenant, a great achievement, especially for a young man from Corsica. However, behind that success, a conflict was still raging within him. Although he now wore a French uniform, Napoleon's heart had not fully shifted. In 1786, he returned to his homeland, hoping to contribute to the nationalist struggle. However, the reality he encountered was far from his expectations. The nationalist leaders, including Paoli's followers, viewed him with suspicion. To them, the Bonaparte family had become too close to France. On the other hand, Napoleon himself began to be influenced by the wave of new ideas spreading across Europe, ideas of revolution, meritocracy, and the fall of absolute monarchy. This tension continued to escalate until in the early 1790s, the conflict between Napoleon and Paoli turned into open hostility. In 1793, the situation became dangerous. The Bonaparte family was forced to leave Corsica and flee to France. That was the decisive moment. Napoleon lost his homeland for the second time, but this time he did not return as a Corsican. He returned as a Frenchman. When Napoleon Bonaparte returned to France in the late 1780s, he did not return to a stable kingdom. He returned to a nation standing on the brink of collapse. For decades, France had lived under an absolute monarchy. King Louis XVI held full power, while the social structure was divided into an unequal hierarchy. The nobility and clergy enjoyed privileges, while the common people bore heavy tax burdens. However, entering 1789, long-suppressed pressure finally reached its peak. State debt ballooned due to wars. The tax system failed to function. Famine spread across various regions. And slowly, discontent turned into collective anger. What initially were demands for reform began to transform into something far greater: a revolution. On July 14, 1789, the people of Paris stormed a fortress that symbolized royal power, the storming of the Bastille. This event is often considered the beginning of the French Revolution. However, at this stage, the revolution did not aim to abolish the monarchy. Most people, even many revolutionary figures, still wanted the king to remain, but with power limited by a constitution. They did not seek total destruction, they sought justice. But revolution has its own logic, and that logic soon moved in a more radical direction. The situation deteriorated rapidly and without control. In 1791, Louis XVI attempted to flee Paris to join monarchist forces abroad, but the attempt failed, and with that failure, the people's trust in their king collapsed. Amid pressure from within the country and threats from European monarchies, the revolution shifted direction. On September 21, 1792, the monarchy was abolished. France officially became a republic. A few months later, the world witnessed something unprecedented: a king tried by his own people. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was executed by guillotine. Not long after, his wife, Marie Antoinette, met the same fate in October 1793. This was no longer merely a revolution. This was the destruction of the old world. After the fall of the monarchy, France did not find stability. Instead, the nation plunged into one of the darkest periods in its history, the Reign of Terror. Under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, the revolutionary government implemented extreme policies to protect the revolution. Anyone considered an enemy of the revolution, nobles, clergy, even ordinary citizens, could be arrested and executed. Thousands lost their lives. Fear became a political instrument. And amid that vortex of chaos, Napoleon Bonaparte struggled to survive. He was known as a supporter of the revolution, and even had connections with the Jacobin faction. However, when Robespierre fell in 1794, another wave of political purges followed. Napoleon was briefly detained, suspected of being part of the radical network. His career nearly ended before it had truly begun. In 1793, a military crisis opened an unexpected opportunity. The port city of Toulon fell into the hands of royalists allied with Britain and Spain, a serious threat to the newly born republic. And here, Napoleon's name began to emerge. At the time, he was merely an artillery captain in the siege of Toulon. But he saw something others did not. Instead of directly attacking the city, he identified the decisive weak point, the harbor. If the harbor could be taken, the British fleet would be forced to withdraw. His strategy was simple, but brilliant. When the plan was executed, the results were undeniable. Revolutionary forces captured key positions. The enemy was forced to abandon Toulon. This victory was not merely a military success. It was the birth of a general. At the age of 24, Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general. 2 years later, the threat came not from outside, but from within. Royalists attempted to seize power through an uprising in Paris, in an event known as 13 Vendémiaire. The weakened government needed someone capable of acting quickly. That choice fell upon Napoleon, and he did not hesitate. With cannons and grape-shot deadly close-range fire, he crushed the rebel forces in the streets of Paris. Hundreds died within hours. That brutal action ended the uprising, and at the same time saved the revolutionary government. From that moment on, Napoleon became known as the man who saved the Republic with a whiff of grape-shot. That victory drew the attention of one of the key figures in the new government, Paul Barras. When the system of government changed into the French Directory in 1795, Barras emerged as one of the most influential figures, and he saw something in Napoleon. Potential. With Barras's political support, Napoleon's career advanced rapidly. In 1796, he was appointed commander of the French army in Italy. At nearly the same time, he married Joséphine de Beauharnais, an aristocratic widow with extensive connections among the Parisian elite. This marriage was not merely a personal relationship. It was a strategic move in the world of power. Upon arriving in Italy, Napoleon immediately faced a harsh reality. His troops lacked food. Equipment was minimal. Morale was at a low point. But instead of holding back, he chose to attack. He applied a strategy that would later become his hallmark, defeating enemies separately before they could unite. This approach was fast, aggressive, and deadly. Within days, the balance of power in Italy began to shift. In April 1796, the first victory was achieved in the Battle of Montenotte. This was not merely a tactical victory. It was a signal that something great had begun. A few weeks later, Napoleon faced Austrian forces in the Battle of Lodi. Under heavy fire, his troops were forced to cross a narrow bridge directly toward the enemy. The assault was brutal, high risk, nearly impossible, but they succeeded. Militarily, this victory did not determine the course of the war, but for Napoleon, its meaning was far deeper. In his later reflections, he admitted that at Lodi, for the first time, he truly believed that he was destined for great things. It was here that the legend began to take shape. The campaign continued, and with it came a series of battles that demonstrated Napoleon's extraordinary tactical intelligence. In the Battle of Arcolet, he used bold maneuvers to disrupt Austrian formations. But the peak of his brilliance was clearly seen in the Battle of Rivoli. There, he faced Austrian forces with superior numbers. But by reading the terrain with precision and positioning his troops with near-perfect calculation, he shattered the enemy's strength. The victory at Rivoli secured French dominance in northern Italy. Napoleon did not face a single enemy. He confronted two major powers at once, Austria and the Kingdom of Sardinia. But with rapid maneuvering and aggressive strategy, he forced Sardinia out of the war early. Austria was gradually pushed back, until eventually Napoleon brought the war directly into the heart of their territory. For the first time, a young French general threatened a major European power on its own soil. In 1797, Austria had no choice but to negotiate. The result was the Treaty of Campo Formio. This agreement granted vast territories to France, confirmed French dominance in Italy, and reshaped the political map of Europe. But most importantly, Napoleon negotiated this treaty almost independently. He was no longer just a general. He had begun to act like a head of state. In the conquered territories, Napoleon did not merely conquer, he built. He established a new order. He created satellite states such as the Cisalpine Republic. Officially, all of this was done in the name of freedom and republic. But in practice, these territories paid heavy contributions to France. Artworks and wealth were transferred to Paris. According to the analysis of David A. Bell, this was a combination of revolutionary idealism and expansion of power. Napoleon did not merely spread the revolution. He was building an empire. Napoleon understood something rarely possessed by other generals. Wars are not won only on the battlefield, but also in the minds of the public. He actively wrote war bulletins, exaggerated victories, and shaped his image as the savior of the nation. Each victory became a story, and each story turned into myth. A myth that spread across France. In 1798, Napoleon took his next bold step. He led the French campaign in Egypt and Syria. The objectives were clear: weaken Britain, disrupt trade routes to India, and expand French influence. On land, he achieved victories. But at sea, everything changed. The French fleet was destroyed by the British in the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon was stranded in Egypt. But even in failure, he controlled the narrative. He returned to France as a hero, not as a defeated general. While Napoleon fought far from home, conditions in France continued to deteriorate. The French Directory government was plagued by corruption, unstable, and losing public trust. A nation that had gone through revolution was once again on the brink of crisis. And amid that chaos, one name shone brighter than the rest: Napoleon Bonaparte. He no longer came as a soldier. He came as a force. Toward one final step, a coup that would transform a republic into an empire. On November 9, 1799 or 18 Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, a grand plan was set in motion. But this was not merely a military coup. It was a carefully calculated political conspiracy. Napoleon worked with influential figures such as Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès to overthrow the Directory. The first step, moving the Parliament out of Paris under the pretext of security. The second step, granting Napoleon control over the military. However, when Napoleon entered the Legislative Assembly, everything changed. The situation erupted into chaos. He was shouted at as a traitor, pushed, nearly physically attacked. The coup stood on the brink of failure. But in the decisive moment, the military intervened. Troops stepped in and forcibly dissolved the parliament. In an instant, the old republic collapsed. After the coup, a new system was established, the consulate. Formally, power was divided among 3 consuls, but in reality, only one truly held authority: Napoleon, as first consul. Through the Constitution of Year 8, he centralized control in his hands, controlling the government, directing the military, and influencing the legislature. The Republic still stood, but only as a symbol. France was now led by a single man. Napoleon's power was never truly secure. He became the target of various conspiracies. One of the most famous was the plot of the Rue Saint-Nicolas, a bombing that nearly took his life. Napoleon survived, but the message he received was clear. As long as he lived, the threats would never cease. Unlike many other revolutionary leaders, Napoleon did not merely survive. He built. During the consulate, he carried out sweeping reforms, stabilizing the economy through the creation of the Bank of France, reforming the national education system, and building a modern bureaucracy. But the most influential reform was the creation of the Napoleonic Code. This legal code guaranteed equality before the law abolished feudal privileges, and became the foundation of legal systems in many countries to this day. Napoleon did not merely rule France. He began to shape its future. To strengthen his position, Napoleon used plebiscites, popular referendums. Officially, the results showed overwhelming support. 1799, supporting the consulate. 1802, making him consul for life. 1804, approving the establishment of the empire. The figures almost always approach 99%. However, according to the analysis of historians such as William Doyle, these numbers were very likely manipulated. Plebiscites were not merely democracy, they were instruments of legitimacy. Napoleon did not only hold power, he ensured that the people believed that power was legitimate. On December 2, 1804, the world witnessed an event filled with meaning and symbolism. At Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon was crowned Emperor of the French. Before Pope Pius VII, he took the crown and crowned himself. Not the Pope, not the Church, not the nobility, himself. That act sent an unmistakable message. Napoleon's power came from no one else, except himself. After becoming emperor, Napoleon continued his military expansion in conflicts known as the Napoleonic Wars. His influence extended to the Netherlands, which at the time became a satellite state of France. Through political changes in Europe, Dutch colonial territories, including the Indonesian archipelago, were also affected. An administrator named Herman Willem Daendels was appointed to strengthen defenses in the Dutch East Indies. One of his most famous policies was the construction of the Great Post Road Anyer Penarikan on the island of Java. This project was not merely infrastructure development. It was part of Napoleon's global strategy to secure logistical routes and strengthen defenses against the British threat. Its impact was felt thousands of kilometers from Paris. In a short time, Napoleon's influence spread across Europe. But to subdue his main enemy, Britain, he implemented a major policy, the Continental System, an economic blockade designed to cripple British trade. However, this policy backfired. European economies were also affected. Allies began to waver, and slowly resistance began to grow. In 1808, Napoleon invaded Spain. But what he faced was not only an army. He faced the people. Guerrilla warfare erupted across the country. This conflict became known as the Peninsular War. French forces were trapped in a prolonged war that drained energy, time, and resources. Napoleon himself even referred to it as a wound that weakened the body of the empire. Meanwhile, Britain entered through the Iberian Peninsula, strengthening the resistance. And for the first time, Napoleon began to lose control. In 1812, Napoleon made a decision that would change everything. He invaded Russia. With more than 500,000 troops, he led one of the largest invasions in history. But Russia did not fight conventionally. They retreated while destroying everything they left behind. Cities were burned. Supplies were destroyed. This strategy is known as scorched earth. Napoleon managed to reach Moscow, but the city was empty and burning. Then winter came, without food, without shelter, without hope. Disease, starvation, and extreme temperatures devastated his army. From hundreds of thousands of soldiers, only a fraction managed to return. This was not merely a defeat. This was total destruction. After the disaster in Russia, Napoleon's enemies united. In the Battle of Leipzig, a great European coalition confronted France. Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, all joined together. This was the largest battle in Europe before the World Wars. Napoleon was defeated, and this time he could not recover easily. In 1814, Paris fell. Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to a small island in the Mediterranean, Elba. There he was still given limited authority as the ruler of the island. But for a man who had once ruled nearly all of Europe, it was never enough. In 1815, Napoleon returned. He escaped from Elba and landed in France. The troops sent to capture him instead turned and joined him. He regained power in a period known as the 100 Days, but Europe did not remain silent. A coalition was formed once again. And on June 18, 1815, in a small village in Belgium, history reached its climax, the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon faced two great commanders, Duke of Wellington and Gepard Labourite von Blücher. At first, the battle was evenly matched, but when Prussian forces arrived, that balance collapsed. Napoleon was defeated, for the last time. After Waterloo, Napoleon surrendered. This time there was no return. He was exiled far into the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena, a remote island with no hope of return. There he spent the rest of his life. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon died at the age of 51. The cause of his death is believed to be stomach cancer, although other theories, including arsenic poisoning, continue to be debated. Napoleon left behind a world very different from the one into which he was born. He spread modern legal systems, strengthened the concept of meritocracy, and transformed the nature of war and the state. But he also reinstated slavery in the colonies, triggered major wars across Europe, and caused millions of deaths. According to David A. Bell, the Napoleonic era marked the birth of modern total war. Napoleon's legacy was never simple. It was not black. It was not white. It was a fusion of both. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte is a story of boundless ambition, of power that can raise a man to the heights of the world, and at the same time, bring him down in the most tragic way. History remembers not only what he achieved, but also the price that had to be paid to achieve it.